He flew back to Vancouver 3 days early because his mother had stopped speaking to the nurses. Not arguing with them. Not refusing medication, just stopped speaking. Stopped turning her head when someone entered the room. Stopped finishing her meals. The night coordinator at the care wing had called his assistant, who had forwarded the message with a subject line that read, FYI re Mrs. Harlow. As if his mother were a filing matter. Owen Harlow read it somewhere over the Atlantic, in a leather seat that cost more per hour than most people made in a week, and he did not sleep for the rest of the flight. The house was outside the city, past the last suburb where the roads narrowed and the trees grew thick along both sides. It had been his parents' house before it was his, and before that it had belonged to his grandparents, who had built the east wing themselves, with wood from a mill that no longer existed. Owen had kept the property maintained the way he kept everything in his life maintained. At a distance through people paid to handle it. His mother, Ruth Harlow, had moved back there 18 months ago after the second fall, after the hospital, after the specialist. Toronto used phrases like significant cognitive retreat and reduced responsiveness to external stimuli, and handed Owen a pamphlet about memory care, as if a pamphlet could explain what was happening to the woman who had once memorized every poem Robert Frost ever published, just to win an argument at a dinner party. Owen had arranged everything: a rotating team of nurses, a physiotherapist 3 times a week, a private coordinator who managed schedules and filed reports, meals prepared fresh, the east-facing bedroom because his mother had always loved morning light. He had arranged everything except time. The drive from the airport took 40 minutes. His driver tried once to make conversation and then quietly stopped. Owen watched the trees blur past the window and thought about the last time he had been in that house, November. 4 months ago. He had stayed for a weekend and left on Sunday evening with the nagging feeling that he had forgotten something, and had not been able to name what it was until somewhere over Ontario. He realized it was simply that he had forgotten to sit with her, not talk to her, not check on her, just sit. The house looked the same from the outside. Stone facade, cedar shutters, the old birch tree near the front gate that his mother had planted the year he was born. The coordinator, a careful man named Paul, met him at the door with a tablet and a prepared summary. Owen did not take it. He walked past Paul and down the main hallway toward the east wing, pulling off his jacket as he went. He heard it before he reached the door. A voice, soft, slightly unsteady. The way voices get when someone is singing just for the pleasure of it and not performing for anyone. A woman's voice. And then underneath it something else. A sound Owen had not heard in a very long time. His mother laughing. It was small. It came out rough and uneven, barely more than a breath caught and released. But it was laughter. He would have known it in the dark in a crowd of thousands. He had grown up inside that sound. Owen stopped walking. His hand rested against the wall. The hallway stretched ahead of him, pale and quiet, the kind of quiet that expensive houses settle into when they are cared for but not lived in. Through the half-open door at the end, late afternoon light fell across the hardwood floor in long gold strips. He moved closer, one step at a time, until he could see through the gap. Ruth Harlow sat in her chair by the east window. The chair had been turned slightly so the light caught the left side of her face, not the right. Owen noticed that, though he could not have said why it mattered. She wore the blue cardigan she had always preferred, the one with the wooden buttons she had brought back from a trip to Nova Scotia 30 years ago. Her hands rested in her lap. Her silver hair had been brushed neatly. Her eyes were open and bright, fixed on something in the room, fixed on the young woman crouching in front of her. She was maybe 28, dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. The kind of face that did not ask to be looked at, and so you looked at it longer. She wore the simple uniform of the household staff. Pale gray, no flourishes, but her sleeves were pushed up to her elbows as if she had been in the middle of something useful when she stopped. She was holding one of Ruth's hands in both of hers, and she was singing, not performing. Singing the way Owen's grandmother used to sing while canning tomatoes. Because the room needed filling and a voice was what she had. The song was old. Something from the 40s maybe. Owen half recognized the melody without being able to name it. The young woman reached the end of a phrase and faltered slightly on a note, then laughed at herself and Ruth laughed with her. Owen put his hand over his mouth. The last report he had received, 2 weeks ago, forwarded by Paul, 3 pages long, signed by the attending nurse, had described his mother as non-responsive to verbal engagement and demonstrating significant withdrawal from social interaction. He had read it between calls on a Tuesday morning and filed it. What he was looking at now was his mother, laughing at a missed note, with more life in her face than he had seen in over a year. The young woman noticed the creak of the floorboard before Owen could stop himself from shifting his weight. She turned, the singing stopped. She did not look guilty. She looked simply and honestly surprised, the way a person looks when they've been caught doing something private but not wrong. She rose slowly, still holding Ruth's hand, and lowered it carefully to the armrest before letting go. Not quickly. Not as if she'd been caught, as if she understood that the hand mattered. Ruth turned her head. When her eyes found Owen, something moved across her face. Not the bright recognition of the easy years. Something quieter, searching. Then her left hand lifted from the armrest and reached toward him. Owen crossed the room. Whatever had made him Owen Harlow. The company, the composure, the 20 years of learning exactly how to hold a room, none of it came with him. He dropped to one knee beside her chair and took her hand in both of his. It was smaller than he remembered, warmer than he expected. She squeezed once. Weak but deliberate. He bowed his head over her hand and did not speak. The young woman had stepped back toward the window. She stood quietly, hands folded, looking at nothing in particular, giving him the room he had not earned but desperately needed. After a moment, Owen lifted his head. His mother's eyes were still on him. The left side of her face held a small crooked smile. The right side moved less. It had seen episode 18 months ago, but her eyes were steady and warm and entirely her. Owen looked at her. "You're smiling," he thought. He almost said it out loud and then did. "You're smiling." Ruth's fingers tightened slightly around his. The young woman spoke from across the room quietly. "She smiles. Most mornings now." Owen turned to her. "Most mornings, today, not had a good afternoon. Most mornings." "How long has she been like this?" he asked. The young woman met his eyes without flinching. "About 2.5 weeks. The room held that for a moment. No one told me." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The silence said everything a complaint could not. Owen stood slowly. He straightened his jacket because his hands needed something to do. Through the doorway he could see Paul hovering in the hall, pretending to look at his tablet. Owen looked back at the young woman by the window. "What is your name?" "Lena Marsh," she said. "I joined the household staff 6 weeks ago. Mornings mostly." 6 weeks. He had not known her name until 30 seconds ago. "What have you been doing with her?" Lena Marsh looked at Ruth before answering, as if confirming that the question could be answered in front of her. Then she said, "Talking to her. Singing sometimes. I move her chair toward the light in the morning. The east window is better before 11, but after that the angle gets into her eyes and I bring it left a little." She paused. "I ask her what she wants." Owen frowned. "She doesn't answer." "She answers," Lena said. "Just not the way the reports describe." That landed differently than he expected. Lena stepped closer to Ruth and spoke to her. "Should I show him?" Ruth's left hand shifted. 2 short taps against the armrest. Lena looked at Owen. 2 taps is yes. Owen stared at her. "When she's cold she holds herself stiller than usual. Her shoulders come in just slightly. When she doesn't want the soup she turns her eyes to the left. When she's tired her hand goes heavy in yours. When she hears a song she recognizes, she breathes differently." Lena said all of this the way someone recites a map they've walked many times, not showing off, just reporting the terrain. She has a lot to say. She just needs someone to wait long enough to hear it. Owen had spent the past 18 months reading clinical summaries from specialists with offices in Toronto and Calgary, and one in Boston whose name he'd seen on a magazine cover. He had paid for every report. He had read most of them. Not one of them had told him that his mother turned her eyes left when she didn't want the soup. He looked at Ruth. She was watching him. Her expression was patient and a little tired. The way she had looked when he was 16 and had come home late and tried to explain himself at the kitchen table, while she sat with her tea and heard him out. He had not held up well then either. Owen cleared his throat. "Paul," he raised his voice just enough to carry to the hallway. "Get Dr. Adami here today if she's available. Tonight if not." Paul appeared at the door. "Of course, anything else?" Owen looked back at Lena Marsh. "Not yet." Dr. Adami arrived before dinner. She was the kind of physician who listened before she spoke, which Owen had once considered inefficient and now found simply necessary. She walked into the east room, looked at Ruth and went still for a moment. "You've seen improvement," Owen said. It came out flat, almost an accusation. Dr. Adami set down her bag. "I suspected there was more response than the reports were capturing." She chose her words carefully. "Medically what happened 18 months ago has not reversed. The damage is still there. Her speech may not return in the way it was. But what I'm seeing now." She looked at Ruth and then at Lena, who stood by the door. "This is not absence, this is response." "To what?" The doctor looked at Lena again. "To being treated like someone who is still here." Owen said nothing. He looked at his mother. Ruth's gaze drifted from the doctor to Lena and settled there with a softness that was unmistakable. Lena gave her a small, quiet nod. That was all, but Owen watched it and felt something give way in his chest. That night he sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after the house went quiet. The coffee in his mug went cold. His phone lay face down on the table. He had turned it over twice to check it and turned it face down again both times. He thought about his last visit in November. He had sat with his mother for about 40 minutes across 2 days. He had spoken to her, or rather he had spoken near her, filling the space with updates about the company, about flights, about renovations to a cottage property she had never seen. He had leaned down and kissed her forehead on the way out. Her face had been still and closed, and he had told himself that was simply how she was now. That the woman he had known was retreating, and the retreat was permanent, and the kindest thing he could do was ensure her physical comfort and let the grief run its course at a distance. He had been wrong. The grief was not the loss of her. The grief he had been outrunning was something else entirely. It was the recognition of what he had chosen not to do while she was still here to be chosen. He had hired the best, he had not offered himself. The next morning Owen was in the East Room before breakfast. He had not set an alarm. He simply woke at 6:45 with the particular awareness of someone who knows they've been late to something, and wants to stop being late. The room was already half lit by the time he arrived. Lena Marsh was there, turning Ruth's chair toward the window. "Good morning," Lena said without surprise. Ruth turned her head slowly. When she saw Owen her eyes went warm. "Good morning, Mom." He sat in the chair across from them, the one that had always held coats and folded blankets in his childhood, and now apparently held visiting sons who didn't know what to do with their hands. Lena worked quietly around him. She had a small tray, tea with honey already stirred in, a bowl of oatmeal, 2 slices of toast. She placed it on the side table and then without rushing showed Ruth the bowl. "Oatmeal today," she said. "I added the brown sugar the way you like it." Owen frowned. The nutrition coordinator said she had stopped responding to food preferences. Lena looked at him. She stopped responding to food she didn't prefer. She turned back to Ruth. "Too much cinnamon yesterday?" Ruth's fingers moved. 1 tap. "That means maybe," Lena said to Owen. "Sometimes it means no. You have to read the eyes alongside it." Owen watched his mother's face. Her eyes were faintly amused. "She's looking at you," Lena said. "I see that. She's been doing it since you sat down. She keeps checking that you're still there." Owen did not answer for a moment. He looked at Ruth, who was in fact watching him with the patient, slightly wry attention she had always brought to things she found both difficult and interesting. "Can I try?" he asked. Lena handed him the spoon without comment. He leaned forward. "Mom, oatmeal?" Ruth's eyes dropped to the bowl. Then back to him. 2 taps. Owen fed her breakfast. He was too slow at first and then too cautious, and Ruth's expression at one point suggested she found him mildly incompetent, which was so completely her that he almost laughed. Lena stepped back and let them manage. Afterward she moved the chair closer to the window and set a small mason jar of yellow tulips on the side table. Not the expensive arrangement from the florist that was delivered weekly, but grocery store tulips in a kitchen jar, the kind of thing you pick up without thinking. "Where did those come from?" Owen asked. "The market on Dunbar," Lena said. "I brought them myself. She pointed at them last week when I had them in my bag, and I figured she might want some in the room." She pointed with her eyes. She looked at my bag, then at the window, then back at me. 3 times. Owen looked at the tulips, then at his mother. Ruth's gaze had settled on the jar with the quiet pleasure of someone sitting near a fire. "She likes yellow," Owen said. "Lena. She planted a whole bed of them along the fence when I was 8. My father said yellow was too cheerful. She said there was no such thing." Lena smiled without turning around. "That sounds like her." Ruth's fingers moved. 2 taps. Owen looked down. 2 taps. "Yes." He swallowed. For a moment the room felt very small and very warm. And it occurred to him that warmth was not something he associated with this house in the past 18 months. Sylvia Crane arrived on Thursday. Owen had known she would. He had not told her he was back early, but Sylvia Crane was not the kind of person who was kept uninformed for long. She had been with Owen for 2 years, in the specific way that people in his world understood that phrase. Present at dinners, known to his assistant, received the invitations that went to Mr. Harlow and guest. She was intelligent and composed and relentlessly well suited to every room she entered. She arrived in the late afternoon with a bottle of Burgundy and the expression of someone who had done nothing that required explaining. Harold, the house manager, 63 years old, who had been with the family since Owen was in secondary school, and who would have had his opinion about Sylvia Crane surgically removed before he would have expressed it, let her in and called upstairs. Owen found her in the sitting room off the main hall, already making herself at home in the good armchair. "I thought you might need company," she said. "I have company." Sylvia looked up. Something moved across her face and then disappeared. "Of course," she smiled. "How's Ruth?" "Better than she's been in over a year." "That's wonderful," she said it warmly. She was good at warm. "Is it the new medication?" "No." Sylvia waited. "There's a woman on the morning staff, Lena Marsh. She's been spending time with my mother in a way nobody else has." Sylvia set the wine bottle on the table and adjusted the label so it faced outward. "A housekeeper, morning staff. She's been there 6 weeks, I see." Sylvia folded her hands in her lap. "And you're attributing the improvement to what exactly?" "Singing, among other things." Sylvia tilted her head. "Owen, I don't want to be unkind, but you've had nurses, physiotherapists, a full-time coordinator. If it were as simple as..." "It wasn't simple," he said. "That's the point." Sylvia looked at him for a long moment. He recognized the calculation in her eyes. She was good at that too, at finding the edge of an argument and deciding whether to push it or leave it. She left it, for now. "Can I see her?" Sylvia asked. They went to the East Room together. Ruth was awake, resting in the chair near the window. The evening light was soft. The tulips had been moved to catch the window's angle. Lena was sitting in the small chair near the bookshelf, reading aloud from a collection of poetry. Something by P.K. Page, Owen realized, a poet his mother had loved since university. Lena stopped when they entered. Sylvia Crane walked in with the particular ease of someone accustomed to walking into rooms that weren't quite hers. She went to Ruth's side, bent slightly and touched the back of Ruth's hand. "Hello Ruth, you look well?" Ruth's eyes moved to her, then away, then to Lena. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds. But it was complete. Sylvia straightened, her smile remained in place, but Owen watched something shift behind her eyes. "Shall I ask if she'd like company?" Lena asked quietly. "That won't be necessary," Sylvia said. "It only takes a moment," Lena said. She looked at Ruth. "Would you like visitors this evening, Miss Harlow?" Ruth's left hand moved, 1 tap. Lena's expression did not change. She looked at Owen. 1 tap usually means maybe, but her eyes are saying something else. Owen looked at his mother's face. Ruth was watching Sylvia Crane with the patient, private expression of a woman who has learned to choose her battles by choosing her silences. "I think she'd like to rest," Owen said. Sylvia turned to him. "We can sit in the main room," he said. "I'll ask Harold to open the wine." Sylvia studied him for 1 moment. Then she smiled again. "Perfectly. Of course." In the main room over burgundy that Owen barely tasted, Sylvia said almost casually, "She seems quite attached to this, Lena." "She is in you." "Yes." Sylvia set her glass down and looked at her hands. "Owen, I'm not suggesting anything improper. I just think, when someone from the household staff becomes the emotional center of a vulnerable patient's day, it's worth asking whether that's the patient's best interest or the staff members." Owen looked at her. "I'm only thinking of Ruth," Sylvia said. The sentence sat in the room like a piece of furniture placed slightly wrong. "I know you are," Owen said. He said it gently, but he's nothing else, and the nothing else said everything. The next morning Sylvia Crane came down early. Not to the east room, to the kitchen, where the household staff gathered before the day began. She came quietly, in a cashmere pullover and flats that made no sound on the stone tile, and she sat at the long kitchen table with a mug of tea, and asked thoughtful questions about the household schedule with the attentiveness of someone genuinely interested. By mid-morning she had mentioned twice, lightly, conversationally, that it was unusual for morning staff to have such extended and unsupervised access to a medical patient, that there were probably insurance considerations, that of course no one was questioning anyone's intentions. Lena was not in the kitchen when Sylvia said these things. But Paul was, and the afternoon nurse, Bev, and young Thomas from the grounds crew, who ate his lunch at the kitchen table because no one had ever told him not to. Word moved through houses like that in a particular way, not quickly, just steadily. Owen was in the library when Lena knocked on the open door. "Sir," she said, "I wanted to let you know, there was a conversation this morning." "I know," he said. She stopped. "I heard enough of it," he said. "I was coming down for coffee." Lena stood in the doorway. She did not look frightened. She looked like someone who was deciding how much weight to put on an uncertain surface. "Is there something you'd like me to do differently?" she asked. Owen looked at her. "No, the schedule, the routine. If there are concerns about boundaries, I'm willing to." Lena. He used her first name without planning to. "My mother asked for you this morning, before I came in, Paul told me." She tapped twice when he mentioned your name. Lena was quiet. "She did not tap for her physiotherapist," he said. "She did not tap for Bev. She has not, as far as I can determine, communicated a preference about any other person in this house for the past year and a half." He paused. "She tapped twice for you." Lena looked down at her hands. "Don't change anything," he said. It was 2 days later that it happened. Owen had come into the east room in the early afternoon to find Lena reading again. This time not poetry but a letter. An old one, pale blue stationery, the ink slightly faded. He recognized his mother's handwriting. He recognized the letter. It was one she had written to her own mother, decades ago, and never sent, and kept in the box on her bureau until the box moved with everything else from the old house. "Where did you find that?" he asked. "She found it," Lena said. "She kept trying to reach the bureau drawer, so I opened it for her. She tapped twice when I held up the box." Lena set the letter down. "I hope that was all right. You read it to her. She wanted to hear it." Owen sat down in the chair nearest his mother. Ruth was watching him. Her eyes held something old and careful, the look of a woman assessing whether the room was ready for something she had been carrying for a while. Owen looked at his mother. "Mom," his voice was careful, "do you want me to stay?" Ruth's gaze moved from him to Lena. Lena's voice was very quiet. "You can ask her directly." Owen leaned forward. "Mom, should I stay?" The room was still. Then Ruth Harlow's left hand rose slowly off the armrest. It rose the way things rise when they cost something, with effort, with intention, with the full weight of everything that had made the movement difficult. She reached toward Owen's hand and held it. Then her hand shifted and found Lena's. She held both of them. Owen felt his mother press their hands together. Gently, once, deliberate. Lena made a small sound and looked away. Owen could not speak for a moment. He looked at his mother's face. Ruth's eyes were wet, but her expression was not sad. It was the expression of a woman who has been waiting for a long time to put something in the right place and has finally managed it. "Okay," Owen said. His voice was rough. "Okay, Mom." Ruth's fingers moved. 2 taps. "Yes." He found Sylvia in the hall. She was dressed to leave, her bag over one shoulder, keys in hand. She had chosen the timing well, as she chose most things. I have dinner with the Tremblays tonight, she said. I thought it better not to interrupt your day. I'll walk you out, he said. At the front door she turned. Her expression held exactly the right proportion of softness, understanding, and something she intended him to read as maturity. I think you need time here, she said, without distractions. Yes, he said. I think so too. Sylvia looked at him for a long moment. Then, call me when things settle. He said nothing to that. She knew. Harold held the door. The afternoon air was cool and smelled of cedar and rain on the way. Sylvia Crane walked to her car with the posture of someone who does not let a room see them regroup. Owen watched the car reach the gate, and then turned and walked back down the hallway toward the east wing. Evenings changed. Not dramatically. Not in the way that things change in stories all at once and brightly. Slowly, the way spring comes to that part of British Columbia. One morning at a time, hardly noticeable until one day you look at the birch tree and realize it's been green for a week already. Owen started eating breakfast in the east room. He stopped speaking about his mother in the third person while she was present. When the physiotherapist gave her update, he would look at Ruth and ask, "Does that sound right to you?" Sometimes she tapped once, sometimes twice, sometimes she only looked tired, and he learned that tired was also an answer. He began to wait. It was the hardest thing he had done in years. Owen Harlow had built a company on the premise that time was a resource to be managed, that waiting was an inefficiency, that every silence needed filling. Here, in the east room, with the light shifting across the Persian rug and his mother's hand resting in his, he learned that some silences were already full. One afternoon he was in the garden, standing at the old rosebed his mother had planted when he was a teenager, holding pruning shears he did not know how to use. Lena came around the corner of the house and stopped when she saw him. She used to do this herself, he said without turning around. Every spring, up at 7 out here before the dew was off. I know, Lena said. She told me. He turned. She told you. Lena's expression was gentle, not in words. She looks at the garden through the east window every morning. When the roses are visible from where she sits, she holds her shoulders differently, more open. She paused. Last week I brought in a cutting and put it in the jar with the tulips. She moved her left hand twice and kept it there for the rest of the morning. Owen looked at the rosebed for a long moment. Then he looked at the shears in his hands. Can I ask you something, he said. Of course. Why did you do it? The singing, the system, the tapping. You've been working here 6 weeks. None of it was asked of you. When I was 22, she said. My grandmother had a stroke. We lived in the same house. My aunts thought that she had mostly gone. They spoke around her. Did everything for her without asking. I sat with her one afternoon because there was no one else home and she kept reaching toward the window, so I opened it. She stopped. She smiled. The first smile any of us had seen in 4 months. All she wanted was the sound of the neighborhood. She shrugged, small and genuine. I don't think most people mean to be unkind. They just assume the silence means something it doesn't. Owen looked at the pruning shears. You know that now? Yes, he said. I know that now. He was quiet for a moment, and then he held out the shears. Lena raised an eyebrow. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. She took the shears. Neither did she the first spring. She told me by looking at a photograph of the first year's bed, which looked terrible, and smiling anyway. Owen almost laughed. That's her. I thought so. They worked in the garden for an hour. Through the east window visible from the rosebed, Ruth Harlow sat in her chair with the afternoon light across her hands watching them. Once when Owen looked up and waved, her left hand rose and moved back and forth slowly. He waved back. Lena did not say anything. She did not need to. 2 weeks later, Owen Harlow cancelled a series of meetings that his assistant described, with impressive restraint, as somewhat important. He sent his deputy to Calgary. He had dinner with his mother 3 times in a week. He brought out the old photo albums from the storage room and sat with Ruth for an entire afternoon, turning pages slowly enough that she could track each one. She had opinions. 1 tap, 2 taps, eyes left, eyes right. A flicker of the shoulder when he landed on a photograph she would rather have skipped, and a long, full attention when he reached the ones she wanted to keep. She kept him there for 3 hours. It was the best 3 hours he had spent in recent memory. One evening he was in the hallway outside the east room when he heard Lena's voice inside, low and warm, and then his mother's breathing change. The shift Lena had described once as the way Ruth's breath went when she heard something she recognized. Owen stopped outside the door. He heard Lena this time, isn't he? The room was quiet for a moment. Then a sound, faint, barely there. Ruth's voice, which had not carried a clear word in over a year, working towards something, 1 syllable. Rough and slow, the way a door sounds when it's been sealed a long time and someone tries it carefully. Yes. Owen pressed one hand flat against the wall. Inside the room, Lena said, I thought so too. He did not go in. He stood in the hallway with his hand against the wall, and his eyes closed, and for a moment he was very still. Then he walked quietly to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stood looking out at the birch tree in the early evening dark. The tree his mother had planted the year he was born. He had not noticed until that week that it had grown so tall. That night after Ruth was settled and the house was quiet, Owen found Lena in the back hallway putting on her coat. She said yes, he said. Lena looked at him. In the room this evening? She said yes. Lena's expression held for a moment and then her eyes filled and she looked quickly away. I know, she said, I heard it too. Owen leaned against the wall. She's still here, she's always been here, Lena said quietly. She just needed someone to wait. He nodded slowly. He looked at the floor and then back at her. I don't know how to thank you for that. Lena shook her head. Don't. She did the work. You just had to show up. He almost said something. Then he thought better of it and simply said, same time tomorrow? Lena put on her coat. I'll be here at 7. I'll be in the East Room, he said. She nodded once, adjusted the collar of her coat and walked out through the back door into the cool Vancouver evening. Owen stood in the quiet hallway for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the east wing, where the last light was still on, and his mother was sleeping with the blue cardigan folded across her lap, and the jar of yellow tulips on the sill, and the window had been left open just enough to let in the sound of the neighborhood, the way she'd always wanted.